To today's roundtable. We're excited to have everyone here. This roundtable is focused around when companies go global, simplifying HR, payroll, and benefits complexities. My name is Palin Johnson. I am the marketing manager at Global Upside, and I will be moderating the webinar. And we'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar today, or to the roundtable rather. And we'd like to encourage everyone to participate in the conversation. So you can do that either by adding comments into the comments field. And we'll be keeping an eye on those comments, and we'll be able to give Raghu an opportunity to respond to those and have you join the conversation. Feel free also to speak up if you have a comment or a question or anything like that. You can also feel free to speak up and share your thoughts or comments or feedback. We also want to welcome you to turn on your webcams and participate in the video if you'd like to. And it's my pleasure to introduce Raghu Bhargava. He is an award-winning serial entrepreneur and the CEO of Global Upside. Global Upside is part of the Global Upside Corporation, which is a conglomerate of brands providing the most comprehensive range of PEO, human resources, accounting, payroll, and talent acquisition services in over 150 countries. Global Upside Corporation brands serve a large customer base from startups to the world's largest enterprises. In Raghu's previous roles, he was the CFO at Active Identity and held leadership positions in several companies, including Deloitte and NetIQ. It's now my pleasure to turn the time over to Raghu.
Thank you, Talon. And guys, I can't emphasize this enough. Please feel free to ask questions. I love to get interrupted. Lets me know that audience is listening and have actually understood what I'm saying. So let's start with the basics of expansion. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with some of these things, but basically when you're looking at going overseas, you kind of have to think about location and footprint. What that means is, where should you go and why should you go there? So going from US to UK makes a lot of sense. It is a big market for us. From America, they speak the same language and things like that, so it's very easy. But is there really a need for our business there? Are there businesses that would, consumers that would buy our services? So you got to think about that. And then as you think about that, you got to think about how many people you need. Maybe you're establishing a research center, R&D center, so you will need a lot more people, which means you got to think about that differently than if you were just trying to hire a salesperson in a foreign country. Startup activities, are you gonna, depending on your footprint, depending on, is this an experiment, you're testing the market, or is this, you already know that there is a huge market there and you're going to go establish yourselves on a long-term basis? You may want to set up an entity, a subsidiary, or if it's 1 or 2 employees, low headcount, you may actually think about hiring through a PEO. PEO is a very US-centric term, professional employment organization, but outside the US, it's known as employer of record, and I'll go into it a little bit more later on. If you're going to set up your own operations entity, then you need to worry about company law compliance. And irrespective of how you set it up, you have to worry about your intellectual property, because obviously you do not want your employees to have your IP, which belongs to you as an employer. Setting up your own entity, you need accounting and payroll services, because obviously as you hire people, you need to pay them, you need to do benefits, which I'm sure you guys are very familiar with. And as you have these people start and stuff, you need to do the accounting for it, because you need to keep a separate set of books. Compliance is important. You need to file VAT, GST type returns on a periodic basis. As the business grows, the frequency can become more. So it may start off as an annual return, go to quarterly or monthly. And obviously there is an annual income tax filing. Guys, any questions? Okay, I can see some nods. Now, from a hiring perspective, obviously you have multiple options. Independent contractors, a lot of companies do that, and it is engaging somebody. Typically, they're doing it on a full-time basis, but sometimes part-time. And when you do that, you are exposing yourselves to risks at the point of termination of the arrangement, because the contractor may go file for, say, unemployment benefits or social benefits, and the government might say, hey, you've not been an employee for anybody for, say, the last year. And he might just say, listen, I was an employee of Global Upside in this country, but I don't know why they haven't paid my taxes. Because obviously now, at the time of separation, he's worried about it. Also, when you have a contractor, if you don't have the right arrangements in place, then the intellectual property they're developing for you, and intellectual property comes in many respects, right? The knowledge base about the market, things like that can be intellectual property, is owned by the contractor, not by you. So that actually presents risks to the company. Obviously, direct hires is what we think about. So they're full-time or part-time basis. And it depends on what you're hiring these people for. Obviously, you have to worry about employment contracts and policies, because there are a lot of rules and regulations that cover employment contracts. For example, in many countries, there is a bilingual requirement. So in Germany, you can't just do an English contract. It's invalid. You have to have German and English. And that applies in many, many countries. Also, remember, it is a contract. It is not an offer letter, if you're familiar with the US concept. So in the US, employment is at will. Outside of the US, employment is by law, by contract. And so you need to worry about, did you address the rules and regulations properly? What happens at the time of termination? What kind of vacation and things that these employees are eligible for? And so in the US, for example, a lot of companies have that all-you-can vacation policies, which really means that, employees can take every Friday off, they can take weeks off, and nobody can complain about it till most probably they get their work done. If you had that policy outside of the US, the guy never has to come to work, because you said, hey, you can take all the time you want off. You cannot force him to come to work. So things like that you have to be very mindful of. We talked about the employer of record. So this is where what you're doing is you're taking a candidate in a foreign country where you don't have a presence, you don't have an entity, you're not registered to do payroll, benefits, things like that. You can put them on somebody else's payroll. For example, our payroll. Their pay stub would show our name on it, Global Upside, but they would act and behave as a regular employee of the client. So they would have a business card that says name of the client. They would have an email address that says Joe at name of the client, that kind of stuff. And they're behaving and representing you, the client, but their pay stub is from us. What are the ones that provide them all the benefits? Statutory benefits, supplemental benefits, customary benefits. Those things are then provided by us. The advantage of the EOR model, you can scale up and hire somebody right away. The advantage is that you don't have to hire them as a contractor. The advantage is you're not having that one person in that one country where you don't have that ability to provide proper payroll, withholdings, payment to the government, social benefits, things like that. The employer of record is providing all of that compliance requirements, everything, and you are benefiting from that employee being there in that local country. And historically, most candidates have wanted to be employees, not contractors. So it is an attractive feature versus saying, hey, we'll pay you your gross salary and your taxes are your responsibility. So that creates that issue with them, or resolves the issue with them. Any other questions, guys, on this one before we move on? Okay, Ryan, let's go on to the next one. So as you're thinking about HR and payroll, so this is obviously the first thing you have to think about, because, and some of this I talked about, because, you know, there is no business without people. And so what do you do as you identify these candidates? We talked about the employment contracts. Beyond the employment contracts, and you guys are in the benefits business, so you understand some of these things like work time regulations. You cannot make somebody work 60 hours a week in France. They're only allowed to work 35 hours. You cannot expect them to answer their emails over the weekend. You have to pay for it extra, things like that. There's obviously termination protection. What that means is that employment is not at will, first of all, but you know, you cannot just walk up to somebody and say, hey, you're fired, you're terminated, just leave. There's obviously processes around it. And in countries like France and in many other countries, because of the social structure and stuff, the termination, severance calculation is complicated because it can be based on the length of employment, seniority, the marital status, the number of children, things like that, age of the employee, things like that. Even in countries like UK, where it's a little bit easier than in a country like France, you still have to think about what restrictions you can place on the employee. So for example, you want to terminate somebody, but the concept of garden leave comes in where they cannot go work for a competitor for say 3 months, 6 months. But what you're doing is you're actually paying them to stay home, kind of sit in the garden concept. That's why the garden leave term comes about. And so you have a long-term extended payment requirement. Obviously, there are breach consequences on both sides for the employee as well as the employer. So you breach the contract, they can take you to court. They breach the contract, you can take them to court. And as you hire these people, let's just say things are going great, you have to then worry about how do you staff it? How do you find these people? Where do you find the people? You may have hired the first employee because he was a friend of a friend, or you had dealt with them at a previous company and things like that. But now you're actually building a team. So you may need to hire 10, 20, 50 people. How do you staff that? How do you find those people? Obviously, as your headcount is growing, and even with the stagnant, stable headcount, you have ongoing HR issues. Or somebody may have a marriage, a child being born, other life events that impact their benefit program. So who and how do they register and things like that? They may just have questions on benefit programs. Who do they go to? How do they get those resolved, answered? And part of that is a global system so that you can actually service these employees from possibly a centralized location. So you may have a shared service center, for example, in Ireland, but then you're servicing employees all over Europe, maybe in Africa, but you're not necessarily in everybody's time zone. So the system may allow you to manage these people. It will allow the people to submit their vacation requests, things like that, time off, and other Q&A, and then that feeds into your Irish center where they can then resolve those. Obviously, depending on where you're headquartered, your shared service center might be, say, 12 hours away time zone wise, or 8 hours away time zone wise. Also, as you start to hire people, you have to worry about payroll and payroll funding. So first of all, the computation of payroll. So the gross to net computation. Keep in mind that gross to net has to be done in local currency. Employees are expecting to get paid in local currency, not in some foreign currency. Now that you've done the gross to net computation, you have two issues. How do you pay these employees if you don't have a local bank account? And how do you pay the government if you don't have a local bank account? For the employees, you might be able to wire funds from a foreign location. Keep in mind that a foreign wire to an employee may cost them banking charges, which means you need to gross up a little bit of those payments so that the banking charges of the recipient is covered, of the employee is covered. Many countries don't allow you to pay payroll taxes from a foreign wire. So then you have to worry about how do you make sure that you get those paid in a proper timely manner, otherwise you will have penalties and interest. Similarly, there are benefit payment requirements, which, yes, if you were paying a broker for the benefits, or maybe an insurance company, they might take a foreign wire, again, with a banking fees to keep in mind. But for example, in UK, the pension providers will not accept a foreign wire for payment of pension contributions. So how do you manage that? So that's that payroll funding, computation, taxes, all of that rolled up into sort of how do you deal with payroll. And then there is payroll reporting. In some countries, in particular in Africa, what happens is that you have to pay payroll taxes in cash by walking into a government office or to a bank and making a hard cash deposit. How are you going to manage all of that? So you got to keep those things in mind as you build up your team, as you build up your payroll processes and things like that. Another point to stop and ask for questions. Right, let's move on to the next one. And guys, if you are asking questions, remember you're all muted. So please do remember, take yourself off mute. So
yeah, and just a reminder, they can chat in as well. If you want to chat in, we can read those questions out to Raghu as well. So
yeah. So I just want to take a little breather here and talk about employee benefits. Obviously, I don't need to educate any of you on what benefits are, but as you're very familiar, there are most countries outside of the US offer statutory benefits that are governed by law. So every employer has to provide, for example, matching pension, pension contribution, matching pension contributions in UK. Socialist countries, obviously, there is, you can go to the government hospital, get treated and stuff and things like that. You're very familiar with those. In what I would like to do is really open it up right now to say, hey, I know you guys are from various countries, various parts of the world. Are there statutory benefits that are very unique in your country of residence where you are doing business? Would love to hear some of those for the benefit of everybody. And again, you can chat or you can speak up by unmuting yourself.
I'll jump in.
Sure.
So I actually live in the UK, but I'm from Australia, and I did a lot of my early benefit years in Australia. So we don't have pension contributions per se. We call it superannuation.
Yep.
So the language that you use around what the employer must provide is very different for new arrivals, or indeed people going from Australia someplace else. The added complication with this is that the tier 2 and tier 3 pensions are one and the same. You contribute to the same pot that your employer contributes to, whether that's self-managed or by an industry fund or whomever it might be. So it's a bit on the language and a bit on the structure, how it's sort of slightly different there.
Yeah, so Peter, very important point, correct? The language, the words are different, even though conceptually the benefit is the same. Absolutely. It's a retirement benefit.
Yeah, okay. It's quite common across different jurisdictions. I mean, pension means, as silly as it might sound, pension does mean different things to different people. In Australia, it's not accumulation. It is, I'm taking my benefit now. But it does mean very different things across different jurisdictions, which is interesting.
Yeah, the very traditional definition of pension is, hey, when I retire, I'll get something from the company, from the employer. And no longer does lifelong employment exist. Rarely does that exist, and most companies are not offering that program where, defined benefit type program that when you retire, we will pay you $1,000 a month or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
The government still do it, but not private employers.
Exactly. Yeah.
And as an employer, it is important to understand what pension or superannuation is and what is the difference and what is the similarity. so that when you are talking to an Australian national employee candidate versus a British candidate, you're using the right terms and they don't think like, who the hell are you? You don't even know what it is in this country. Then they think you are communicating a bad message, a bad impression of yourself as a potential employer. They think, do I really want to go work for this company that doesn't understand that I don't get any pension, I get superannuation, as an example, correct? And how does that play? So this is why having access to people like yourselves is extremely important from that perspective as you are building your teams and stuff. With that, let's Ryan, move on to the next bullet here, which is supplemental benefits. So again, you are, I'm sure, very familiar with it, and I love to hear an example of a supplemental benefit, which really, at least from our perspective in the US, just means that this is something that the company is deciding to offer over and above whatever the statutory requirement is. So if the statutory requirement is 7% for the superannuation in Australia, how much of a matching are we doing? 0%, 5%, 15%. Now, obviously, at some point it becomes taxable benefit and things like that. But that aside, how are we doing this and what are we doing? Understanding that. So again, I would love to hear examples of things that you have seen clients offer, which might have been unique with a particular client or in a particular situation. Come on, guys. One of you at least has an example of something like that. Well, I will bring up an example of something that our EOR, the employer of record entity, offers as a supplemental benefit. So we talked about the statutory benefit being like a health insurance, right? You have that through the government programs. Our EOR program actually offers a certain supplemental insurance policy, which then allows you a visit to a private doctor on a one-off basis. It may provide additional vision or dental benefits. It may provide an extended amount of or a higher amount of life insurance, things like that, disability programs. So those are typically being offered not as standard offering by every employer in every country, but more as to the employers that care about their employee base a little bit more. So then they offer a richer benefit program over and above whatever the government is offering. So the employee actually has a better relationship with the employer in terms of benefits over and above the statutory requirements.
So, Raghu, this is Lisa Hawker, and I'm here in the U.S. So, you know, it's a very different environment here.
Oh yeah,
because there's nothing truly statutory in anything we do. Yeah. But as we continue to see the U.S. healthcare system evolve, yeah, and lots of questions around how much longer, for example, employer-sponsored medical being the normative, what we'll call supplemental or worksite benefits continue to draw a lot of attention. And I don't know what this looks like throughout the world, but the array and interesting benefits, so supplemental, it's kind of the standard still exists, the disability and additional life insurance that you know employees can buy up, but it's gone into a whole different realm of trying to handle what's not covered under the medical plan, like critical illness insurance if I got cancer or if I had a heart attack. And then accident insurance, you know, I broke my arm or my kid broke their leg playing football. Yeah, but it's gone even further into probably the most talked about benefit we have in for 2021 is pet insurance. And I don't know if that's because everyone's been home for 7 months with their dog or what, but we have so many employers implementing these type of really interesting, and then also financial type benefits, tuition, college tuition reimbursement type stuff, college loan repayment. because so many individuals are coming out of college, coming into the workforce with significant debt. I think that is fairly US centric, but I wonder what the trends can look like beyond the US. Because I don't actually spend my days working in the global benefit space. Tanya, who's also on this call with me, does. But I always find it interesting how wacky we can sometimes be in the US. But is that a trend that's growing?
And I do have an opinion on it, but I would love to hear from the other attendees as to what they are seeing in their local markets as, for example, a pet insurance, which really honestly is very, very US centric type thing. Or student loans and things like that, because most people don't graduate with a large loan amount in these foreign countries, where you can actually go to a fairly good institution and come out with zero debt or very nominal or something like that. So would anybody like to offer their opinion on what they're seeing?
Hi, it's Sarah here. We were only talking to a customer today, and we're seeing a big change in bikes and cycling to work, because people are really not wanting to get a local transport at the moment. So companies are now starting to take a lot of interest in actually getting bike to work schemes, which we see a lot in Europe, and it hasn't really been prevalent in the UK, but we're starting to see a massive swing on that at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what other supplemental benefits are brought in. But I think in the UK, a lot of our benefits are supplemental. Global employee benefits to us is a necessity, whereas in the UK it's a nicety, and it is taxable on a lot of the benefits. So companies don't force this. So we have the option of voluntary or flexible benefits, where the employee takes the choice. It might be salary sacrifice, it might be company paid. There's so many different variations and options in the UK. So it's also a growing market still, and we have seen some uplifting, obviously with mental health being top priority. EAP has been a massive swing in the last couple of years, especially with COVID. That's really come into play to make sure that the employees do have the access to for mental health. Compared to other countries, we are varied, but we are definitely still expanding in that arena, I think.
Yeah, and the one thing that Sarah, you're pointing out about the mental health or employee assistance program, as they are known at least in the US, is becoming a bigger deal, because we are all staying from home, which means it's putting different pressures on us. The work-life balance is becoming more complicated. So, does your employer offer that or not? And is that something that can be added to your existing policies? Because that becomes not as expensive a proposition for the employer, but we still be able to offer that. And yes, some of these employee assistance programs, like the mental health, if I can use that word, has become much more relevant this year. I mean, who thought about this? Yes, we all have had challenges all our lives. Forever, humanity has had that challenge, but this year is just unbelievable in that respect. Anna, have you been unmuted? Would you like to comment on this?
So Anna, for some reason the audio isn't coming through, even though it's unmuted. Could you chat in your comment or question that you had, and we'll be happy to address that. So for some reason, I don't know why it won't come through on even. Oh, there you go. We can hear you now.
Yes. Okay. So
yeah.
I was saying that for Brazil, we have both type of benefit, the statutory and also the supplemental. The challenge for us is, as a non-admitted country, especially for health insurance, that health is the most important benefit for us. So we have no cap and no limitation on usage. So you can stay how many days you need to in hospital. We don't have any limitation in terms of cost. as an expenses, medical expenses. You can do prevention, checkup on the medical plan. So the medical inflation in that case is really tough for us. So it's been like 17% a year, which is really high. And I think this is all the topic that we discuss. This is the focus that all the local HR is talking about, and also it's quite difficult to explain this medical inflation to the headquarter, especially when we have an economic rate as 4%, right? So we do all this explanation, and of course all the documents here in Brazil, it's in Portuguese version, so we don't have a big column contract, for example, or program, so everything must be translated to be understand. So it's really a need of a consultant firm that normally the HR needs to understand, to establish, and to design the benefit program down here.
Yeah, and I mean, to the extent we are a member of the WBN, you understand that we're all obviously brokers. Well, Global Upside is not a broker, you know, we're a non-broker member, but you know, there is the two aspects of it, right? Understanding the local requirements, which you guys are experts in, and then the other side of it is explaining it to a foreign employer, saying, hey, listen, this is what is customary here, and yes, we can send you the paperwork, but it's in Portuguese. How do you deal with it? So that's where these relationships become important from our perspective, where we can hold the hand of our client and work with you on the other side to make those connections so that you're able to service the client, but we're also able to make sure the client is happy with what they're buying, what they're paying for, understanding that, and how does that play out for them.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I can see in the chat, you know, about some of these benefits like the daycare and stuff like that, gym membership. And depending on the country, yes, some of these programs are very, actually, Ryan, can you hit enter and get to the third bullet point on the slide, please? So customary benefits. So these are obviously things that, even though they're not statutory and not, well, they customary are typically supplemental, but because everybody offers it, you're required to offer it. So, you know, these food vouchers or food stipends is very common, for example, in Italy. So, you know, everybody has that. That's how they go out for lunch and eat lunch every single day. So you just have to do it. Otherwise, nobody would come work for you, things like that. You know, gym membership, daycare, obviously, some of these depends on the size of the employer. And we deal with a lot of those in M&A transactions where some smaller division of a very large public company is getting spun off. And the large public company, a Fortune 50, Fortune 100 company, was offering a very extensive benefit program. And now this smaller spin-off, they may have gone from 5,000 people in UK to 50 people in UK. How do you provide all of these? So one of our spin-offs, the situation that happened was that the seller owned this huge building and they had a gym in the building. So everybody had free access to it. As the spin-off happened and they had about 150 people that were going to get spun off separately and eventually had to move to a separate building. That new building would not have a gym. So how do you compensate the people? Because of requirements around, you know, to pay and stuff and things like that. So those are challenges you face in putting some customary benefits in place, especially as your headcount is small. And again, you guys are familiar with a lot of these, but you know, you guys also know how to work it. Typically, the smaller the headcount, the harder it is to procure a plan. But as your headcount goes to 5 and higher, procuring benefit plans becomes much easier. Obviously, if you had 100 people, you know, it's much easier to buy a plan in every country. Even in the US, you couldn't buy a plan for a, you know, single employee if that's all you had. And so if you're starting a brand new business, you have some challenges with that.
Raghu, we've had a few comments come in. One was from Tanya, and she said, what I have seen from global clients, depending on industry, would be food stipends, gym membership, daycare support, telemedicine, and increased interest in wellness programs. I think that was on your previous comment. And then we had a couple other questions coming after that, which was from Lisa. She says, that's great info, Tanya. As Sarah also mentioned, EAP seems to have never been more on the forefront on important benefits.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, Tanya also asked a question that says, is there a minimum number of individuals needed for you to implement? And likewise, is there a maximum number of employee groups that you work with? Also, what type of benchmarks do you utilize in putting together the benefits package or the recommendations? The supplementary or top-up packages, that is?
Yeah, so we personally, our client base varies from that company that is expanding into a new country with that first employee, all the way to larger employers. They may have hundreds of employees in that country. And so we don't box ourselves into, we only deal with small companies or large companies, but we're all over the place in terms of what we are supporting our clients with. Yes, like I said, it is harder to get benefit plans put in place for that single employee, things like that, first 2 employees, 3 employees. And I understand that brokers are obviously paid through a piece of the premium, so there isn't enough money for a one-person plan to cover the cost and expenses and stuff like that. So what we have done is we have worked with brokers in that country to say, hey, listen, here is some additional funds to cover your costs. And this way, the client gets what they need, and the brokers are willing to work because now it meets that minimum threshold of the funds they want to, you know, the income they want to derive from putting any plan in place. As far as benchmarks are concerned, we don't have any real studies, but you know, we have anecdotal information about a lot of countries, about a lot of industries. And then many times our clients are coming to us and saying, listen, this is what we do in the US, so this is what we want to offer in that country. And then we can debate with the client like, yeah, offering that kind of a benefit makes no sense. Like we talked about the pet insurance, correct? Yes, you are offering that in the US, but offering that in UK might not make sense. And sorry, I'm picking on UK as an example, but instead you may want to, and like we talked about the EAP earlier, it is becoming more important. So how about thinking about that? And looking at what's happening in the economy, looking at what's happening in the world on this planet, and helping clients to work through those is how we work it. And obviously talking to local brokers helps a lot, our in-country partners. So, Ryan, let's go to the next one.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yes, Liz.
Hi, I just wanted to, I've met with your team before, but wanted a reminder on how many countries you guys are using in-country partners versus where you have an established entity.
Is this, are you talking about our PEO offering, employer of record?
Yes, yeah, your PEO offering.
Yeah, so that is a moving target for us at all times because, you know, as we see business and opportunities happening, we are establishing our own entity. So today, I think our entity count is about 56, 57. But I will also tell you that we are in the process of setting up 10 other countries right now. So as an example, and I couldn't give you the comprehensive list, but Argentina should be done in November. Lithuania should be done this week. Latvia, Egypt will be done next month. And Egypt is a little slower process, so it takes a little time. So we're going a lot into the Baltic states. We're expanding a lot into Africa this year, just the way business has grown, because we're obviously, when you think about the first 56, 57 countries, we have very good coverage in Western Europe. We have a very good coverage in the in the APAC region with the major economies, correct? So Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, and New Zealand, and so we do these all the time as business changes. So my expectation is that by the end of the year, we'll be in about 65 countries.
Okay.
And if, Liz, if you have a particular country of interest that you want to know about, please, on the last slide, there is contact details for myself. Feel free to give me a call, or if you've talked to others, Amanda or whoever else you may have talked to, please reach out to them. We can give you a pinpoint answer of those countries and whatnot.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So just a real quick conversation about M&A and carve-outs. Obviously, I hinted a little bit at it in my previous discussions, but due diligence. So obviously, due diligence, greater emphasis on regulatory and legal compliance. It is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And it is becoming a bigger issue in this pandemic times, because what is happening is, the governments are slowing down, just like every other business is slowing down right now. And so you can't even get confirmation, was the last VAT return filed for this entity or not? Was it filed properly? Governments aren't doing the audits that they used to do regularly. So you have a little bit more exposure from a compliance perspective in these M&A deals. When these PE firms or even any business is trying to buy a foreign entity, they may or may not be able to set up or be willing to set up the legal structure to acquire these operations. And so that creates issues with how do you efficiently transfer employees of the seller into the buyer's entity. And this is where the EOR services become very important, especially in smaller countries where smaller headcount locations, where you put them on EOR and you can take your sweet time to set up your entities. Some of these people may actually not stay with you, say, over a period of time. So then, attrition happens, things like that. You may change your mind and not have to set up your own entity, things like that. Obviously, in the larger countries, some countries are much easier to set up. So like in UK, Australia, we can set up an entity very fast. In some countries like China, it takes 90 days. Sorry, there's no way to rush it. So you got to think about how do you do this. And then the day one readiness, this is sort of what we're seeing is on these TSAs, Transition Services Agreement. They used to be 3 to 6 months, and now they're getting to be 1 day, 0-day TSAs. What that means is on day one, you have to have these people transition over with the full benefits, with full payroll system structure support to get these guys going. And even the accounting and tax is getting shortened from, say, a year or two to as little as a month or two. So what that does is the pressure on the buyer is immense. So people like us have a very important role to play, and not to minimize the importance of the brokers, because, how do you have all of those benefit plans in place on day one? You obviously have to work with local brokers. You have to make sure that where you cannot provide, in my earlier example, the gym access, then how do you compensate these people? What is a fair compensation for a gym membership in the city of London, as an example? So those are things that you have to worry about. Any questions on the M&A? And I know I went a little fast on this because we're going to be running out of time here soon. So I just got a question from Juan Carlos. And yes, how can Global Upside and a WBN broker member can work together? So having access to us, having access to you is important for both sides. So we know that if we need to get some help in Panama, we know who to call. We can pick up the phone, we can send an email quickly, make a connection. Obviously across the world. And why is that important? So when you're doing M&A, or when you're just setting up a brand new company for a client I'll just stick to Panama, Juan Carlos, as an example. When you're setting up a new entity for a client, how do you make sure that they have the benefits that they need? How do you ensure that they get the support they need from a local benefits perspective? Well, that's where we will reach out to people like yourselves. And similarly, as your clients, whether it's a local client expanding overseas or a local client that has operations overseas but is running into challenges, they can't get their payroll right, they can't get their accounting right, or compliance is a big black hole for them, reach out to us. The EUR is a great solution where we can put them on our payroll, especially on the smaller headcount countries. If the headcount is larger, or if they don't want to do the EUR, absolutely not a problem. We can help establish their entity, help put everything in place so that they can be up and running as soon as possible. So great question. Thanks, Juan Carlos. Ryan, let's go to the next slide. So I talked about global systems, and HRIS systems, or HCM systems, now that they're known as HCM, Human Capital Management Systems, are extremely important. Excuse me. Why are they important? Because you need to have a system of truth. And even though US happens to be the largest market and lots of HR systems, none of the systems extend overseas. So in Germany, we need to track the religion and the church affiliation of each employee because it impacts your payroll. In the US, you can't even ask that question. So you've got to worry about how do you track all of this data, and functionality. That's what becomes extremely important. Compatibility. So are you buying a system that you will have to bring in and then change all of your processes? Are you buying a system that can plug into your current process or integrate with your current system? So you may be on a Workday in the US, and will this system be able to communicate with Workday or Oracle, take data from Oracle to populate local employees? This way you have a system, global system for your international employees, and you have a Workday or something like that for your local employees. Or you may have these systems in your larger locations and have a supplemental system for the countries with the smaller headcount, because it can get very expensive to implement some of these larger systems in every country, especially if you have a small headcount in those countries. Reach, obviously, I can't emphasize that enough. Because if you're just buying a US-centric system, how are you going to manage people in all of those other countries where you have employees? And how does a manager sitting here in the US know who's taking vacation? What vacation are they taking? What all vacations are they eligible for? All of those things matter. What are the benefits that are being offered in that country? The local employee needs to be able to see that and apply and take advantage of it. But if you don't have a system that is global, that is catering to every country, every geography, you've got a challenge. Obviously, in today's environment of GDPR requirements, and where a lot of countries, a lot of states in the US are implementing their own equivalent GDPR requirements, you have to worry about this. Is the system accurate and dependable? Is it secure? Is it complying with the regulatory requirements? All of those things do matter a lot. And obviously, we have one of our offerings is a system like this that complies with these requirements. It is in multiple languages, 15 languages, called MIHI, M-I-H-I, and you can look it up on mihi.com. But the system was built to address these needs because we just see a big, huge hole globally. So you may be able to buy local systems in every country, but it's very, very hard to buy an international system that will cover the globe and cater to all of the needs of every country. Any questions on the system issues? Well, I think we're coming to the end of our call here. scheduled time. So you guys, Talon, we are sharing these slides with the attendees, correct?
Yeah, so we do want to thank everyone for attending, and we do want to encourage anybody that does have any additional questions. They can reach out to Raghu directly. We have his email on this final slide right here, so raghu@globalupside.com. Raghu, we want to thank you for your time as well and for the insights that you shared with us. We also did just want to mention we are associate members of the WBN network, and you can feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. We have our email listed on this final slide, info@globalupside.com, and you can visit us online at globalupside.com. We will be sharing the final recording with everyone along with the slide deck. And again, we encourage you to reach out with any final questions that you have. So, thank you everyone for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for participating, asking the
Thank
pointed
you.
questions.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Raghu. Appreciate it.